Hey, stop scrolling for a second. I need you to hear this. There was a little boy, barely 3 years old, sitting on the cold marble floor of one of the most expensive mansions in the country. He wasn't crying because he was hungry. He wasn't crying because he was lost. He was sobbing over a tiny broken toy truck, a cheap plastic thing that probably cost less than $1. And in that same moment, one of the most powerful billionaires in the world, a man who had never once stopped for anyone, walked past that hallway. He could have kept walking. He should have kept walking. That's what everyone expected. But he stopped. And what he did next didn't just change that little boy's life forever. It cracked something open inside a man who had forgotten what it meant to be human. Stay with me. You need to hear every single word of this. Hey beautiful people. Welcome back to the channel, or if you're new here, welcome for the very first time, and I am so glad you found us today. This story. I'm telling you, I've been sitting on this one for a while because I wanted to get it just right. Because some stories don't just deserve to be told, they deserve to be felt. Before we dive in, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city, your country, even just your continent in the comments right now. I read every single one, and honestly, seeing where you all come from around the world gives me chills every time. And hey, if stories like this move you, if they make you feel something real, consider subscribing. No pressure at all. But we pour everything into every single story we share here, and it would mean the world to have you stay. Alright, let's get into it. Get comfortable because this one is going to stay with you. She woke up every morning before the sun did. Not because she wanted to, but because she had no other choice. Her name was Amara. And if you had passed her on the street, which most people did without a second glance, you might have noticed the quiet determination in her dark eyes, the way her hands moved with a practiced efficiency that only comes from years of hard work. You might have noticed the thin lines of exhaustion around her mouth, the kind that no amount of sleep ever fully erases. But what you probably wouldn't have noticed, what most people never noticed, was the small photograph she kept folded inside her uniform pocket, right over her heart. A photograph of a little boy with the widest smile you've ever seen, 2 tiny front teeth missing, holding up a plastic toy truck like it was the most precious thing in the entire universe. That little boy was Kofi, her son, 3 years old. And he was the reason for every single sacrifice Amara had ever made. Amara had come to this country 6 years ago with 2 suitcases, $40, and a letter of recommendation from a church pastor back home. She had left behind her mother, her sisters, the mango tree in the front yard she used to climb as a child, everything that felt like her, because she believed with every fiber of her being that if she worked hard enough, suffered long enough, she could build something better for her child. For the first 2 years, she had cleaned offices, then restaurants, then private homes. She had scrubbed floors on her hands and knees until her palms bled. She had smiled at employers who spoke to her like she wasn't quite human. She had sent money home, kept almost nothing for herself, and learned to measure joy in the smallest of things. A kind word, an extra hour of sleep, a phone call from her mother on Sunday evenings. Then, 3 years ago, Kofi was born. And everything, every sacrifice, every humiliation, every lonely night, suddenly had a name. Faith. Gap-toothed smile. But raising a child alone in a city that didn't know your name was a different kind of hard. She couldn't afford daycare most weeks. On the days she had to bring Kofi to work with her, which happened more than she liked to admit, she would set him up in a quiet corner of whatever room she wasn't cleaning, with a small bag of crackers and his beloved toy truck, and she would whisper to him in their mother tongue, "Be still, my heart. Mama is working. Be still." And Kofi, as if he already understood the weight his mother carried, would sit there quietly, rolling that little truck back and forth across the floor, making soft engine sounds under his breath. His tiny face lit up with a private joy that only children are capable of. It was that toy truck that mattered most to him. She had bought it from a street vendor for 75 cents when he was barely 18 months old. It was nothing. A battered, scratched-up little thing with one wheel slightly wobbly. But to Kofi it was everything. He slept with it. He ate with it beside him. When she gave him a bath, he'd insist on holding it above the water like it needed to be kept safe. She didn't have the heart to tell him it was just plastic. Now, on this particular morning, the morning that would change both of their lives forever, Amara was working her first day at a new job, the Harrington estate. If you grew up anywhere near this city, you knew the name. Everyone did. The Harringtons weren't just wealthy. They were the kind of wealthy that felt like a different species entirely. The kind of wealth that had its own gravity, pulling everything and everyone into its orbit. The estate sat behind iron gates on 40 acres of manicured land. There were 12 bedrooms, a private library, an indoor pool, a screening room, and a staff of 11 people who all moved through the house with the careful silence of people who understood that their presence was meant to be felt but never seen. The man who owned all of it was Elias Harrington, 52 years old, self-made, ruthless, not in a cartoonish way but in the precise, surgical way that comes from decades of turning emotion into a liability. He had built his empire from nothing, and in doing so, he had very efficiently dismantled the softer parts of himself. He had been married once, briefly, long ago. There were no children. There were no pets. There were barely any personal photographs on the walls. Just art. Expensive, cold, impressive art that nobody actually looked at. Amara had been warned about him by the housekeeper who hired her, a stiff woman named Mrs. Chan who delivered instructions the way a judge delivers sentences. Mr. Harrington does not like disruptions. He does not like noise. He does not engage with the staff unless there is a problem. And if there is a problem, there had better not be a problem. Amara had nodded, said yes ma'am, and understood immediately. Be invisible. She could do invisible. She had been doing invisible her whole life. What she hadn't planned for, what she couldn't have planned for, was that the childcare arrangement she'd made for Kofi that day would fall through at the very last minute, leaving her standing at the gates of the Harrington estate at 7 in the morning with a toddler on her hip and absolutely nowhere else to go. She almost turned back. She almost called Mrs. Chen and said she couldn't come. She almost chose her dignity over her rent. But then she looked at Kofi, at his bright, trusting eyes, his little hand curled around her collar, and she thought of the empty refrigerator at home, and the overdue notice on the kitchen table, and she made the only choice a mother in her position could make. She walked through those iron gates, with her son in her arms, his toy truck clutched tightly in his small fist. She had no idea she was walking into the day that would change everything. Have you ever been forced to make a choice where every option felt impossible, but you had to choose anyway? Where you had to keep going even when every part of you was terrified? Because that's exactly where Amara was standing. Right on the razor's edge of everything. She made it through 3 hours without being noticed. The 4th hour was when everything started to unravel. Kofi, bless his heart, was behaving like an angel. Amara had tucked him into a little alcove near the laundry room, far from any of the main living areas, behind a heavy door with his crackers, a juice box she'd packed and his truck. She checked on him every 15 minutes, kissing his forehead, whispering her reassurances, and then slipping back out to scrub and polish and fold and dust her way through the lower half of the estate. The house was beautiful in the way that museums are beautiful. Impressive, immaculate, and somehow deeply empty. She worked with the efficiency of someone who has cleaned 1,000 houses and learned the unspoken rules of each one. Don't touch anything that isn't yours. Don't look too long at anything personal. Don't make sounds beyond what the work requires. Be the hands that make things perfect and then disappear. She was good at this. She was very, very good at this. By 11 o'clock, she had finished the ground floor reception hall, the dining room, and 2 of the guest bathrooms. Mrs. Chan had passed her twice, checked her work with the thoroughness of a military inspection, found nothing to criticize, and moved on without a word. Which, Amara had been told, was the highest form of praise available at the Harrington estate. She allowed herself one small exhale of relief. And then she went to check on Kofi. He was fine. He was happy. He was rolling his truck along the baseboards of the alcove, narrating a quiet adventure to himself in a mix of English and the lilting syllables of his mother's first language. He looked up at her with those enormous eyes and said very seriously, "Truck go fast, Mama," and she laughed so quietly it was barely a sound at all, just a warmth that moved through her chest. She kissed him. She gave him another cracker. She went back to work. It was around 1 o'clock that she heard it. She was in the hallway connecting the east wing to the central staircase, a long, grand corridor with dark hardwood floors and tall windows that let in columns of pale winter light, when she heard Elias Harrington's voice coming from the direction of his study. Not to her. He didn't know she was there. He was on a phone call, his voice sharp and clipped, the kind of voice that expects to be obeyed by the universe itself. "I don't care what it costs. I care what it produces. If it doesn't produce, cut it." Sentiment is not a business strategy, Marcus. You know better than that. Another pause. "Fine. We're done here." She heard the call end. She heard the precise sound of expensive shoes on hardwood floor. She flattened herself against the wall instinctively, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because men like Elias Harrington had a way of making you feel like your very existence was a minor inconvenience. He emerged from the study into the corridor, already looking at his phone, already somewhere else mentally. He passed within 4 feet of her without looking up. She breathed. He was almost to the staircase when he stopped. Not because of her. He still hadn't registered her presence. He stopped because he'd heard something. Sound. Small sound. Coming from somewhere in the house that sounds were not supposed to come from. It was Kofi. Not crying. Not yet. Just talking. That musical, unconscious toddler chatter that children produce when they think no one is listening. A little river of words and sounds that tumbled out of the laundry alcove and down the corridor. Elias Harrington turned his head slowly. He looked in the direction of the sound. Then he looked at Amara. And in that moment, in the terrible silence between his realization and whatever came next, Amara felt her heart plummet straight through the polished floor beneath her feet. "Is there a child in my house?" His voice was very quiet. That particular kind of quiet that is worse than shouting. Amara straightened. She looked him directly in the eye. Because she was many things, but she was not someone who looked away when it mattered. "Yes, sir. My son. I'm very sorry. My childcare fell through this morning and I had no alternative. He is in the laundry alcove. He has been quiet and he has touched nothing. I understand if this is unacceptable and I will leave immediately if—" "How old?" She blinked. "Sir. How old is the child?" "3, sir. He just turned 3. Elias Harrington looked at her for a long moment. His face was completely unreadable, a skill she suspected he had spent decades perfecting. Then he turned and walked toward the laundry alcove. Amara followed, her heart hammering. What she found when she reached the doorway was Elias Harrington, this titan of industry, this man worth hundreds of millions of dollars, standing in the entrance of a small, dimly lit alcove, looking down at a tiny boy who was looking back up at him with absolutely zero fear. Because Kofi had not yet learned to be afraid of powerful men. He simply looked up, tilted his head to one side, and held out his toy truck, as if offering it for inspection. "Truck," said Kofi. And something happened to Elias Harrington's face. It was small, barely perceptible, like a single crack running through very old stone. He looked at the truck. He looked at the boy. He said nothing. And Amara stood in the doorway, not breathing, watching a man she had known for 4 hours stand completely still, as if he had just heard a sound from somewhere so deep inside himself he'd forgotten that place existed. Tell me honestly, when was the last time a child's innocence stopped you completely? When did something small and pure cut right through all your defenses and reach something you've been protecting for years? What happened next took less than 60 seconds. But it set off a chain reaction that nobody, not Amara, not Elias, not anyone in that house, could have predicted. Kofi, having received no response to his truck offering, did what 3-year-olds do when adults don't engage quickly enough. He moved on. He went back to his game, rolling the truck along the floor, making his engine sounds. The truck wobbled, that one slightly loose while giving it a lopsided, endearing roll. Elias watched this for perhaps 20 seconds. Then he did something that shocked Amara so thoroughly she had to grip the doorframe. He crouched down, right there on the floor of the laundry alcove. One of the most powerful men in the country folded himself down to a toddler's eye level, suit jacket and all, and watched the truck make its wobbly circuit across the concrete floor. "It lists to the left," he said quietly. Amara stared. "Sir, the truck, the front left wheel, the axle pin is probably loose." He said it the way a man says something he knows thoroughly, not showing off, just stating fact. Which made Amara wonder, for the first time, about the boy Elias Harrington had been before he became Elias Harrington. And then, before she could say or do anything, Kofi picked up the truck, held it out toward this large, serious stranger, and said 3 words that would echo far beyond that small room, far beyond that day, far beyond anything any of them could see from where they were standing. "Can you fix?" He couldn't quite say make it work again yet. His language was still finding itself. But the meaning was perfectly clear. His wide eyes held nothing but hope, the uncomplicated, total hope that only the very young can still produce, because they haven't yet learned that the world sometimes says no. Elias Harrington looked at the toy in the child's outstretched hand. He looked at it for a long time. And Amara, watching from the doorway, saw something cross that carefully composed face that she could not name at first. Something old. Something buried. Something that looked almost like grief wearing the clothes of a distant memory. He reached out. He took the truck. He turned it over in his large hands. Those hands that had signed million-dollar contracts, that had built and dismantled companies, that had shaken the hands of presidents, and he examined the wobbly wheel with the focused attention of a craftsman. "I need a small flathead screwdriver," he said. To no one in particular. To the room. Amara blinked. I think there's a basic toolkit in the maintenance cupboard at the end of the..." "Get it, please." She got it. What followed was 11 minutes of the most surreal silence Amara had ever experienced in her life. Elias Harrington sat cross-legged on the floor of her son's temporary hiding spot. His bespoke suit trousers pooled around him. His tie loosened without him seeming to notice, and he carefully, methodically tightened the axle pin on a 75-cent plastic truck. Kofi sat opposite him, watching with the gravity of someone overseeing a surgery. He did not wriggle. He did not chatter. He simply watched, with his hands folded in his lap, as if he instinctively understood that this was important. Amara stood in the doorway and felt tears climbing her throat for reasons she couldn't entirely explain. Maybe it was the image itself, the absurdity and the tenderness of it colliding so hard they became something else entirely. Maybe it was the way her son trusted this stranger so completely. Maybe it was something in the careful, patient way Elias worked, like he wasn't a billionaire doing a charitable act. Like he was just a person who knew how to fix something and was fixing it because it needed to be fixed. When he was done, he set the truck on the floor and gave it a small push. Rolled straight. Perfectly, cleanly straight. All four wheels true. Kofi's face. Oh, Kofi's face. It was like the sun rising inside a small room. His eyes went wide. His mouth dropped open. Then he grabbed the truck, pressed it to his chest, looked up at Elias and said, with a sincerity so pure it was almost painful, "Thank you." And Elias Harrington, who had not, in the recollection of anyone on his staff, ever shown a visible emotional response to anything, pressed his lips together very firmly and looked away for a moment. When he looked back, his expression was composed again. Almost. Not quite. He stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Amara, and here is where the first twist arrived, quiet and devastating, like a stone dropped into still water. "What is his name?" "Kofi, sir." He nodded slowly. "My son's name was also Kofi." The words fell into the room like something physical. Amara felt the air change. It was past tense. She opened her mouth, closed it, didn't dare ask. Elias looked at the little boy one more time, at the child clutching his repaired truck to his heart like it was the most precious thing in the world, and something in his expression shifted again. Not cracking this time. Opening. He walked out of the alcove. He walked down the corridor. He disappeared up the staircase. Mrs. Chan appeared at Amara's elbow 40 seconds later, looking as though she'd swallowed something sharp. "Mr. Harrington says the child may stay in the east sitting room for the remainder of the day. There are toys in the storage cabinet, from when the house was used for family gatherings. You may use them." She delivered this message and left before Amara could respond. Amara turned back to look at her son. Kofi was rolling his truck across the floor, straight and true and perfect, completely unaware that he had just done something nobody in years had managed to do. He had reached inside the chest of a man who had locked the door from the inside. And without trying, without knowing, with nothing but a broken toy and a child's uncalculating hope. What did Elias mean when he said, "was"? What happened to his son? And why, out of everyone and everything in his enormous, expensive life, did a 3-year-old's broken truck manage to unlock what nothing else could? Keep watching. Because this story is only just beginning to reveal itself. There are some rooms in a house that hold their breath. Rooms that remember things the rest of the world has forgotten. And on this day, one of those rooms finally exhaled. The east sitting room was nothing like the rest of the estate. While every other room in the Harrington mansion was curated within an inch of its life, precise, cold, magazine-worthy, the east sitting room felt different. It was warmer, smaller. The curtains were heavier, their color a deep, faded amber, as if they had absorbed years of afternoon light. There was a rocking chair in the corner that didn't match anything else. A slightly worn spot on the rug near the window. And in the storage cabinet, exactly as Mrs. Chen had said, toys. Not the generic, impersonal kind. Real toys. A wooden train set with hand-painted carriages. A set of building blocks, each one monogrammed with a small letter. A picture book with a spine so cracked it had clearly been read 100 times. A stuffed elephant missing one button eye. Amara stood in front of that cabinet for a long time. These weren't decorative. These were loved. These had belonged to someone. She set Kofi up with the building blocks, which delighted him completely. His truck set carefully to one side like a visiting dignitary, and she went back to work. But her mind stayed in that room. She thought about what Elias had said. My son's name was also Kofi. She thought about the way he'd said it. Not performing grief, not inviting sympathy, just stating a fact that happened to be the most devastating fact in the world. She asked Mrs. Chen that afternoon, carefully between tasks, keeping her voice light and her eyes on the floor, as if she were asking about something much less significant. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long time. Then she said, in a voice stripped of its usual crispness, "Master Kofi was 5 years old when he passed. It was 11 years ago. The illness came fast. Mr. Harrington was traveling when it happened. He didn't make it back in time." He paused, adjusted a picture frame that didn't need adjusting. He had this house emptied of anything personal 2 months after, except that room. He couldn't bring himself to touch that room. She said nothing more. She walked away, and Amara stood very still in the corridor, with a dust cloth in her hand and tears burning quietly behind her eyes, and she understood. She understood why the house felt like a held breath. She understood the locked expression on that man's face. She understood why a billionaire had sat cross-legged on a concrete floor and fixed a broken toy with the focused tenderness of someone performing a small, private act of devotion. Because the truck wasn't just a truck, and the boy in the alcove wasn't just a boy. To Elias Harrington, for that brief, unguarded window of time, something ancient and heartbroken in him had looked at Kofi and seen the ghost of everything he'd lost. She went back to the east sitting room. Kofi was asleep on the rug, curled around his truck, one cheek pressed to the floor, building blocks scattered around him like a tiny fortress. He looked like the world's most peaceful little general. Amara sat in the rocking chair, the one that didn't match, the one that rocked with a familiar, settled rhythm, as if it had held people in grief before and knew how to do it. She was still sitting there, not crying past crying in that quiet country that exists on the other side of tears, when the door to the east sitting room opened. Elias Harrington stood in the doorway. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't holding anything. He was just standing there, in his loosened tie and his perfectly pressed suit, looking at the sleeping child on the floor of the room that held everything he'd lost. He didn't say anything for almost a minute. Then, "You can bring him every day." Amara looked up. "Sir, when you come to work, you can bring the boy. There's space here. It won't be a disruption." He said it in the same tone he used for everything. Flat, decisive, final. As if it were a business arrangement. As if his voice weren't doing something complicated and private somewhere underneath the surface. "That's very kind of you, sir, but I couldn't possibly." "It isn't kindness." He said it quickly, firmly, and then quieter. "It's just the room doesn't get used." He looked at Kofi one more time, at the toy truck held tight in the sleeping boy's fist. "His axle pin will loosen again eventually," Elias said. "Cheap construction. Let me know when it does." And he walked away. Amara sat in the rocking chair in the room that remembered everything, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, and she let herself feel the full, staggering weight of what was happening. Something was healing in this house. Something that had been broken for 11 years. And it had started, impossibly miraculously, with a wobbly wheel on a 75-cent truck. Have you ever walked into someone's life at exactly the right moment, without knowing it? Have you ever been the accidental answer to someone's long, silent prayer? Because that's what Kofi was. Without knowing. Without trying. Just by being exactly, completely himself. Over the weeks that followed, the Harrington estate began to change. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But the way a frozen river changes in early spring. Slowly, certainly, and from the very deepest place. Amara brought Kofi every day. And every day, without fail, something small shifted. The first week it was just the routine. Kofi in the east sitting room with his blocks and his truck and his inherited stuffed elephant, to whom he had given the name Jumbo, with great ceremony. Amara working through the house. Elias working in his study. The two of them occupying the same space without intersecting. Except they did intersect. Not much, but enough. On Tuesday of the first week, Elias was walking past the east sitting room with a phone to his ear when Kofi spotted him through the open door and called out, with zero hesitation, "Hello, Fixman." Elias stopped mid-sentence. Looked in. Kofi waved at him with his whole arm, the way toddlers wave. Entirely committed, deeply enthusiastic, completely certain the gesture would be returned. Elias stared at him. Then, slowly, he raised one hand. Wave. Mull. Slightly unsure. Like a man performing a gesture he'd forgotten the mechanics of. And then he continued his phone call. But Amara, passing in the corridor, saw it. And she tucked it away in her heart. On Thursday, Kofi had discovered the picture book, the one with the cracked spine, and had carried it to the doorway of the east sitting room and simply stood there, holding it up, because he wanted someone to read it to him, and Amara was occupied. Mrs. Chen was passing. She saw the book. She saw the child. Something moved across her face, a long, private recognition, and without a word she took the book, led Kofi back to the rocking chair, sat him on her knee and read to him. When Amara came back 20 minutes later, she found Mrs. Chen, rigid, efficient, unsentimental Mrs. Chen, sitting in the rocking chair with a sleeping toddler in her arms, one hand resting lightly on his back, her eyes very bright. Her lips pressed together in an expression that had nothing to do with authority and everything to do with love. She saw Amara in the doorway and immediately reassembled her professional expression. "He fell asleep," she said crisply. "I didn't want to disturb him." "Of course," said Amara. And she didn't smile. Out of respect. By the end of the second week, the staff, all 11 of them, these quiet, careful, professionally invisible people, had quietly, collectively, with zero discussion or permission required, adopted Kofi. The cook made him soft scrambled eggs on Wednesday mornings because she'd overheard him tell Amara they were his favorite. The groundskeeper carved him a small wooden bird from a fallen branch, and left it outside the east sitting room door without a note. The driver, a serious man named Robert who had worked for Elias for 16 years and who nobody had ever seen smile, produced, from somewhere in his coat pocket, a tiny toy car, which he presented to Kofi with the solemnity of a general awarding a medal. And Kofi, because he was 3, and because the world was still exactly as wondrous as it appeared, received all of these gifts with equal radiant delight. He was cracking this house open, one person at a time. And then there was Elias. By the third week it had become, though neither of them acknowledged it, a kind of unofficial routine. Elias would finish his morning calls by 11. He would walk past the east sitting room. Kofi would spot him and call out some greeting. "Fixman. Hello, Fixman. Look, Jumbo has a hat now." And Elias would stop. First for seconds. Then for minutes. Then by the third week, for long enough that he was sitting on the floor while Kofi climbed on him with the total physical confidence of a child who has decided an adult is a piece of furniture, and Elias sat there. This man who ran a billion-dollar empire, and allowed a 3-year-old to place a building block on top of his head with great care and announce, "You is a tower now." He did not smile. Not exactly. But his eyes did something. And once, just once, when Kofi was trying to reach the highest shelf of the storage cabinet and couldn't quite get there, Elias picked him up, both arms lifting him easily, holding him securely, and he held him up to reach whatever he was looking for. And for just a moment he closed his eyes. Just a moment. Just a breath. The thing that had been broken in him for 11 years. The thing that no amount of wealth, no empire, no achievement could touch. Beginning slowly to mend. Amara watched all of this from the edges. And she understood something profound. Something she would carry for the rest of her life. That grief doesn't end. Evolves. Waits. And sometimes it opens a door when the right person knocks. Even if that person is 3 years old and knocks with a plastic toy truck. Have you ever watched someone come back to life? Not dramatically. Not in a movie moment. But slowly in small gestures, in the quiet return of something they'd given up on ever feeling again. Because that's what was happening in the Harrington estate. And the most extraordinary part hadn't even arrived yet. Had been 3 months. And everything was about to change in a way that nobody saw coming. Not Amara, not the staff, not even Elias himself. Because the truth had been there from the beginning. Hidden in plain sight. It was a quiet Friday afternoon in March when Mrs. Chen knocked on Amara's door. Not the estate, but her apartment door. After hours. Which had never happened before. She was holding an envelope. "Mr. Harrington asked me to deliver this," she said. Her voice was doing that thing again, the complicated thing that had nothing to do with professional detachment. Inside the envelope, a letter. On heavy, cream-colored paper. In handwriting that was careful and deliberate. As if each word had been chosen and placed with precision. "Dear Amara, I am not a man who explains himself easily. So I will simply say what is necessary. 3 months ago, a small boy sat on the floor of my home and asked me to fix a broken thing. I am aware that he was talking about the truck. I also know, in the way we know things we cannot explain, that something else was being asked of me. My son Kofi died 11 years ago. I have not said his name to anyone in 11 years. I said it to you on your first day, and I did not plan to. Some things are larger than our plans. I have established a full educational trust in your son's name. From nursery through university. Whatever path he chooses, wherever it takes him, it is funded. Completely. The legal documents are being prepared and will come through the estate office next week. This is not charity. I want to be clear about that. This is a debt. One I don't know how to repay in any currency I understand, to a boy who will never know he collected it. He brought something back into my house that I had believed was gone forever. I don't have language for that. So I'm using what I have instead. There is one other thing. I have been in contact with my attorneys regarding the documentation you shared with me when we completed your employment papers. I noticed that your visa status is under review, with a renewal hearing scheduled for April. I have arranged legal representation for you, the best available. You will not face that hearing alone. You came into this house carrying the world. You should be able to put some of it down. E. Harrington. P.S. The axle pin on the truck has loosened again. I noticed this morning. I have the screwdriver. Amara sat on her kitchen floor with that letter in her hands, and she did not move for a very long time. She cried. Fully, completely, with the totality of someone releasing something they've been holding for years. Not sad tears. Not entirely. The kind of tears that come when something enormous and invisible that you've been carrying for so long you've forgotten you're carrying it, suddenly, unexpectedly, gets lifted. But there was more. The morning of the April hearing, she arrived at the legal office and found not just the attorney Elias had arranged. She found Elias, sitting in the waiting room, in a suit, with a coffee he wasn't drinking. She stopped in the doorway. "You didn't have to come," she said. "No," he agreed. Silence. "Kofi," he said, and the word was both names at once, both boys, 11 years apart and impossibly connected. Told me this morning that I should come because... He paused. Something crossed his face. Because helpers come to help. His words. He said it the way you say something that has destroyed you in the best possible way. The hearing went well. 3 weeks later, Amara's visa was renewed. Full status. Multiyear. And here is the final twist that had been there, quietly, from the very beginning, waiting for the right moment to surface. 6 weeks after the hearing, Elias called Amara into the study, not as an employee being summoned, but as a person being invited. He gestured to a chair. He sat across from her. On the desk between them was a photograph. Slightly faded at the edges. A little boy, maybe 4 years old, holding a toy car and smiling at the camera. The same enormous, gap-toothed, luminous smile. The same smile as Kofi. Amara looked at the photograph. Looked at Elias. Something turned over slowly in her chest. His mother, Elias said quietly, was from the same region you're from. She came here the same way you did. Alone, looking for something better. We were young. It was complicated. She went home when the pregnancy was. It became complicated in different ways. He looked at the photograph. She sent photographs for 3 years. Then she became ill. By the time I received word, he was already. He stopped. Started again. I never met him. Not once. I funded his care from a distance, through attorneys, like a transaction. Because I didn't know how to do anything else. Because I had already turned myself into a man who doesn't know how to do anything else. The silence in the room was so full it had weight. When your Kofi walked into this house, he said, and held out that truck, and looked at me like I was simply a person who might be able to help, I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't. He folded his hands on the desk. What I do know is that I've spent 11 years building things that don't matter, and I've been given, twice now, the chance to build something that does. And I am not going to waste it again. He looked up. I'm setting up a foundation for children of immigrant workers. Educational support, legal aid, housing resources. I'd like you to help lead it. Not as my employee. As my partner. Amara looked at this man. This complicated, broken, slowly healing man. And she thought about every floor she had ever scrubbed. Every border she had crossed. Every night she had packed a small bag of crackers and whispered, "Be still." My heart to the tiny person who was her entire reason. She thought about a wobbly toy truck. She thought about a boy who asked a stranger with total trust, "Can you fix?" And she said yes. Have you ever considered how many lives hinge on a single small moment? Broken wheel. Crouching down. A 3-word question from a child who doesn't yet know what impossible means. Here is what this story taught me. And I hope it stays with you. We spend so much of our lives trying to appear unbreakable. We build walls. We perfect our expressions. We get very good at moving through the world without letting it touch us because we learned, somewhere along the way, that being touched means being hurt. And then life sends us a 3-year-old with a broken toy. And the whole architecture comes down. Here's the truth. Healing rarely arrives in the form we expect it. It doesn't announce itself. Doesn't come with credentials. It comes in a small voice from a forgotten hallway, asking the simplest question in the world. Can you fix? And sometimes, when we're brave enough, when we're tired enough of being broken, when we finally stop pretending we're not, the answer is yes. Not just to the truck. To everything. To ourselves. The deepest question I want to leave you with tonight. Is there something broken in your life? Something you've walked past 1,000 times, convinced it can't be fixed, or that you don't deserve to have it fixed, that's been waiting for you to simply stop, crouch down and try? 'Cause it might be easier than you think. And it might start smaller than you'd ever imagine. If this story moved you, even a little, please hit that like button right now. Takes 1 second and it means everything to this channel. And drop a comment below telling me, which moment in this story hit you the hardest? Was it when Elias fixed the truck? When he said his son's name? The letter? Tell me. I read every single comment and I genuinely want to know. If you're not subscribed yet, this is your sign. We tell stories here that are designed to make you feel something real. Stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stories that remind you why being human is worth everything. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss one. And if you want more stories like this one, keep watching. We've got more right here waiting for you. Thank you for staying. Thank you for feeling. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop, crouch down, and fix something small. That's where the miracles begin. End of script.